You ever wonder what happens when a woman dismissed as overhead, discarded like yesterday's trash, actually holds the kill switch to $100 million empire? They thought they'd erased me from the system, wiped clean like I never existed. But that's when I truly began to control everything. One signature from 3 years ago would vaporize $77 million right before the investors' eyes. They called me expendable. I became inevitable. My name is Lena Harrow, and I should have seen the signs earlier. 38 years old, 7 years at Orion DataWorks in Austin, and suddenly my name vanished from the Monday morning stand-up invite. Not rescheduled, not moved, erased. The email notification that never came felt louder than any termination letter. I sat at my desk that morning, watching my team file past my office toward conference room B, their eyes carefully avoiding mine. Marcus, who I'd mentored for 3 years, actually took the long way around to avoid walking past my door. I refreshed my calendar 17 times, nothing. For 7 years, I'd been the backbone of this place. Every payment system, every compliance report, every framework that kept our data flowing, I'd built it, maintained it, nursed it through countless midnight crashes and emergency patches. The executives loved calling me their guardian angel when shit hit the fan at 2 a.m, but guardian angels, apparently, had become obsolete. The transformation started 6 weeks ago when Graham Ellis strutted in as our new CEO, Silicon Valley's golden boy, wearing those pristine white sneakers that had never touched an actual street, dropping buzzwords like grenades in every meeting. "We need to accelerate innovation," he'd say, his hands slicing through air like he was conducting an orchestra of disruption. "Legacy systems are anchors. We need to cut loose and sail." Legacy. That's what I'd become in his vocabulary. Not experienced, not essential. Legacy. His army of innovation hires invaded our floors like locusts in designer hoodies. Kids fresh from boot camps who called our battle-tested systems grandma code and laughed when I mentioned compliance requirements. They'd cluster around Graham like disciples, nodding enthusiastically when he'd point at our infrastructure diagrams and declare, "This needs to die." But that's our entire payment processing backbone. I'd said during one particularly brutal architecture review, Graham had smiled that practice smile, the one that never reached his eyes. Exactly. Time for a heart transplant. The room had erupted in knowing chuckles, even Sandra from Finance Sandra, who'd called me crying when her reports wouldn't reconcile last quarter, was smiling along. I started documenting everything after that meeting, not out of paranoia, but instinct. 7 years of building systems teaches you to always have backups. Every email, every code commit, every architectural decision I'd made. But most importantly, I pulled the contracts, the framework licensing agreements, the API ownership documents. And there, buried in subsection 7B of our orchestration framework agreement, I found something interesting, something I'd insisted on 3 years ago when they'd begged me to modernize our entire backend in 6 months. A clause about intellectual property and administrative rights that everyone had been too rushed to read properly. My phone buzzed. A message from HR. "Hi, Lena. Could you pop by for a quick transition review? Nothing formal, just touching base on some documentation. Thanks." Transition review. They couldn't even be honest about it. I looked around my office photos from team celebrations, the System Savior Award from 2019, the coffee-stained notebook where I'd sketched the architecture that now processed 8 million transactions daily, 7 years reduced to a transition review. But as I stood to walk to HR, my hand brushed across that folder of contracts on my desk. Subsection 7B gleamed up at me from the highlighted text. They thought they were erasing me from the system. They had no idea that I was the system. The transition review was scheduled for 3:45 p.m., deliberately timed, so I'd have to walk through the main floor just as the innovation team was having their daily synergy session. Graham probably orchestrated it himself, one final parade of the old guard being led to slaughter. I felt their eyes tracking me as I passed, some pitying, most indifferent, a few almost gleeful. Tyler, one of Graham's star recruits, actually stage whispered, There goes the Kobold Queen. Loud enough for his corner to hear. The laughter that followed felt like needles in my spine. HR had sent Rebecca, someone I'd never seen before, 20-something, immaculate blazer, practiced empathy face. She'd probably done a dozen of these this month. Lena, so wonderful to finally meet you. I've heard such amazing things about your contributions. Past tense, already buried. My old manager, David, sat beside her, studying his phone like it contained the secrets of the universe. 3 years of lunch meetings, strategy sessions, him calling me his secret weapon, and now he couldn't even look at me. We're just optimizing our organizational structure, Rebecca chirped, sliding a folder across the table. Your position is being reimagined as part of our transformation initiative. Reimagined, not eliminated. Reimagined, like I was a piece of furniture being reupholstered. The severance package is very generous. David finally spoke, still addressing his phone. 3 months, full benefits, glowing references. I opened the folder. The termination was effective in 2 weeks, but we both knew I'd be locked out of everything meaningful by tomorrow morning. The paperwork was thorough. NDAs, non-competes, intellectual property transfers, standard corporate burial documents. There's also a knowledge transfer period, Rebecca added brightly. We'll need you to document all your processes, hand over all passwords and administrative access, train the new team. The innovation hires, I kept my voice level. They're very eager to learn from your expertise. My expertise, the same expertise Graham had openly mocked in last week's All Hands, calling my infrastructure archaeological artifacts from the pre-cloud era. The room had roared while I sat there, maintaining the very systems they were laughing at. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with a glass of wine and my secret folder, not secret because I'd hidden it, but because nobody else had ever bothered to look. 7 years of contracts, licensing agreements, framework documentation, the boring stuff that kept the company breathing, but that executives treated like furniture essential but invisible. I traced my finger over Clause 7b again. Such beautiful legalese. In the event of involuntary termination of the principal architect without a signed continuity handoff agreement, all administrative rights and control mechanisms shall automatically revert to the original license holder. The original license holder, that would be HarrowCore LLC, the consulting company I'd set up years ago when I was still freelancing. I'd used it to license the orchestration framework to Orion, keeping ownership while granting them usage rights. It was supposed to be temporary, just until the company bought the framework outright. But they never did. Too boring, too low priority. We'll handle it next quarter, David had said for 12 quarters straight. Graham had no idea that his entire Novaverse project, his wife's revolutionary platform that would transform how enterprises engage with data, was built on a foundation I still owned. Every API call, every database transaction, every authentication token flowed through my framework. I pulled up the corporate announcement about Novaverse. $77 million in projected first-year revenue. Camille Ellis featured prominently in the press photos, her smile as sharp as her husband's ambition. We're not just disrupting the market, she was quoted saying, we're eliminating the inefficiencies that legacy thinking created. Legacy thinking, like the framework that would run her revolution. I opened my laptop and logged into HarrowCore's admin panel, my personal backdoor that I'd maintained for support purposes. Fully documented and legally protected in Appendix J of our support agreement. The system status showed green across the board. 8 million transactions today. 400,000 API calls, all flowing through my code. In 2 weeks, they'd terminate me, cut me loose like dead weight, overhead. But they'd forgotten to read the fine print. They always did. I smiled, not Graham's practice smile, but something genuine, something with teeth. They thought they were eliminating inefficiency. They were about to learn what elimination really meant. The executive retreat at Blue Water Lake House was supposed to be my final humiliation. David had actually smiled when he told me attendance was mandatory for all senior staff. Knowing full well I'd be gone in 5 days. a weekend of watching them plan a future that didn't include me. I drove the 3 hours to Lake Travis alone, watching Austin shrink in my rearview mirror. The invitation email had been purposely vague about room assignments. When I arrived, the receptionist's smile faltered as she found my name relegated to the overflow list, a room in the auxiliary building, half a mile from the main lodge where core team members were staying. Core team. I'd built the core, and now I was auxiliary overflow. The welcome reception was already in full swing when I walked in at 7:30 p.m. Graham held court near the floor-to-ceiling windows. His wife Camille draped on his arm like an expensive accessory. The innovation team orbited around them, young faces flushed with alcohol and proximity to power. I grabbed a glass of wine and found a corner, becoming furniture again, invisible but present. It's amazing what people say when they forget you exist. "The old guard is almost cleared out," Graham was saying, gesturing with his whiskey. "By Q2, we'll have shed 40% of our legacy overhead." "Including the system's grandma?" someone asked. A ripple of laughter. "Especially her," Graham grinned. "Do you know she actually tried to lecture me about compliance requirements like we're still in 2015? Camille laughed, that crystalline sound that probably costs thousands in voice coaching. "She reminds me of those librarians who shush you for breathing too loud. Totally obsolete." "Lena's actually been instrumental," David started weakly. "Was instrumental," Graham corrected. "Past tense. David, we're future tense now. Camille's Novaverse launches in 2 weeks. 77 million in committed contracts already. You think we got there by listening to people who treat innovation like a threat?" The CFO raised his glass. "To the future." To the future, they echoed. I stepped onto the balcony, needing air. The lake stretched out below, dark water reflecting the lodge's lights like broken stars. My hands were shaking, but not from the cold. "She was useful once," Graham's voice drifted through the open door. "Every company has that one person who knows where all the bodies are buried. But once you dig up the bodies and bury them properly, you don't need the gravedigger anymore." More laughter. Someone made a joke about teaching old dogs new tricks. Another voice suggested that some dogs were better put down. I left after that. Back in my auxiliary room, I opened my laptop and pulled up the framework documentation. Every line of code I'd written, every integration I'd built, every security protocol I'd implemented. 3 years ago, when they'd begged me to save their failing infrastructure, I'd done more than fix it. I'd rebuilt it from scratch, using my own proprietary framework as the foundation. The framework license agreement was a masterpiece of paranoia. I'd insisted on retaining ownership, licensing it to Orion with specific terms. Clause 7B was my insurance policy and voluntary termination without proper handoff, triggered an automatic reversion of control rights. Not the code they could keep running that, but the administrative controls, the API keys, the authentication mechanisms, the very nervous system of their infrastructure. They'd signed it without reading. Graham probably didn't even know it existed. I pulled up the Novaverse architecture diagrams that had been shared in the company wiki. Beautiful, ambitious, revolutionary, and built entirely on my framework. Every microservice, every data pipeline, every customer-facing API call would route through the orchestration layer I controlled. My phone buzzed. A text from Tyler, the innovation hire who'd called me the COBOL Queen. "Hey, quick question system's throwing some weird deprecated warnings. Normal." I stared at the message. They were already hitting the first compatibility issues. Without me maintaining the framework, small cracks would become chasms, but they wouldn't realize that until it was too late. I typed back, "Check the documentation in the knowledge base." What documentation? Graham said we were rebuilding everything fresh. I didn't respond. Let them figure out that you can't rebuild a plane while you're flying it, especially when you don't know what keeps it in the air. Outside, I could hear laughter from the main lodge. They were celebrating their future, toasting their innovation, planning their revolution. In 5 days, I'd be gone, terminated, overhead eliminated. In 14 days, Novaverse would launch. And somewhere between those two dates, Clause 7B would activate, silent and automatic, like a dead man's switch I'd built 3 years ago when I still believed loyalty meant something. They thought they were burying the gravedigger. They had no idea they were about to become the bodies. The termination meeting was scheduled for 9 a.m. sharp on a Tuesday. Rebecca from HR had blocked a full hour. Though we both knew it would take 15 minutes max, corporate theater demanded its proper runtime. I arrived at 8:55, wearing my best blazer, the one I'd worn to accept the System Excellence Award 2 years ago. Rebecca was already there, arranging papers with mechanical precision. David skulked in the corner, apparently fascinated by his coffee cup. "Lena, thank you for your professionalism during this transition," Rebecca began, reading from a script she'd probably memorized. "Your contributions to Orion DataWorks have been invaluable." We're past tense. I was being discussed like a funeral eulogy while still breathing. The severance package had grown slightly someone's guilty conscience, probably David's. 4 months instead of 3, extended health coverage, even a transition bonus if I completed the knowledge transfer comprehensively. We'll need all system passwords, administrative access, documentation, and any proprietary materials, Rebecca continued, sliding a checklist across the table. It will supervise the handover process this afternoon. I signed where they pointed, initialed where they required, agreed to everything they asked. My compliance seemed to unsettle them. They'd prepared for anger, negotiation, maybe tears, not this calm acceptance. "I'll need copies of all exit documentation," I said quietly, "for my records." Rebecca hesitated. "That's unusual." "It's my right. Page 47 of the Employee Handbook, Section 12.3. She looked at David, who shrugged. 20 minutes later, I walked out with a complete copy of every document, including the signature pages where they'd formally terminated me without a continuity handoff agreement, the smoking gun they'd handed me themselves. That afternoon, Brandon from IT watched over my shoulder as I transferred passwords into their management system. He was 23, neck tattoo peeking above his collar, constantly vaping when he thought I wasn't looking. "This framework shit is complex," he muttered, scrolling through my documentation. "Graham said we were replacing it all anyway." "Good luck with that," I said mildly. "What's HarrowCore LLC?" He'd found a reference in the license headers. "My old consulting company, from before I went full-time." "Why's it all over the codebase?" "Because I wrote the codebase." He laughed. "Yeah, but Orion owns it now, right?" I pulled up the licensing agreement on my screen. "Orion has usage rights." "Same thing." "Not exactly." He wasn't listening anymore, already texting someone about happy hour plans. Why would he care about the legal distinction between ownership and usage rights? He was innovation team. They moved fast and broke things. They were about to break everything. That night, I sat in my empty office. They'd already removed my nameplate and initiated the final phase. Using my personal HarrowCore admin access, I updated the framework's licensing module. Not changing anything, just confirming the existing terms. Clause 7B was already there, dormant, waiting for the termination date to trigger its activation. I added one small modification to the notification system. Instead of silent failover, it would display status messages, nothing malicious, just informative. Users should know when their systems changed ownership. After all, the beauty was its complete legality. I wasn't hacking, wasn't stealing, wasn't even technically doing anything wrong. I was simply allowing an existing contract to execute its terms. A contract they'd signed, a contract they'd never bothered to read. My phone buzzed constantly. The innovation team had questions. Where was this documented? How did that module work? Why was the test environment throwing warnings? I responded to each one identically. Please refer to the knowledge base or contact your team lead. By Thursday, 2 days before the Novaverse launch, the warnings had escalated to errors, not system breaking, not yet, just enough to make them nervous. Brandon called me directly. "The framework's acting weird. It keeps asking for license validation." "Did you input the license key?" What license key? The one in the documentation. Which documentation you left like 8,000 files? The one labeled Critical Licensing Information Read First. Silence. Then, Graham told us to ignore anything labeled critical from the old system, said it was fear-mongering. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. I'm sure the innovation team can figure it out, I said. They're very talented. Friday was my last day. No farewell party, no goodbye cake, just me, alone in my stripped office, watching the framework's diagnostic panel on my personal laptop. The countdown had begun. T-minus 72 hours until Novaverse launch. T-minus 16 hours until Clause 7B activated. I packed my last box slowly. 7 years reduced to cardboard and bubble wrap. Outside my office, the innovation team was in crisis mode. Graham's voice carrying through the walls. I don't care what the system says, override it. If only it were that simple. I left my keycard on the empty desk and walked out at exactly 5 p.m. Nobody said goodbye. They were too busy fighting fires they didn't understand in a system they'd mocked. In 16 hours, at 9 a.m. Saturday, I would officially be terminated. And Clause 7B would wake up. The Novaverse launch was everything Graham and Camille Ellis had dreamed of, a $77 million testament to their vision of innovation. The marketing campaign had been relentless. The future of enterprise data. Where legacy dies and tomorrow begins. Every tech blog, every industry publication, every social media platform drummed the same message: Orion DataWorks was about to change everything. Camille had taken personal ownership of the launch. Her face graced the promotional materials, her signature approving every design decision. This isn't just Graham's project, she told Forbes in an exclusive interview. This is our revolution. We're showing Silicon Valley that Austin can innovate beyond the old guard's limitations. The old guard. Me. From my apartment, I monitored the pre-launch chaos through Slack archives that Brandon had forgotten to revoke my access to. The innovation team was in full panic mode. Systems that had worked perfectly for weeks were suddenly throwing authentication errors. API calls that had been stable were timing out. The framework was rejecting new deployments with messages they didn't understand. Why does it keep saying, awaiting license administrator approval? Tyler posted at 11:43 p.m. Sunday. Just override it, Graham commanded. We can't. It's hard-coded into the framework core. Then bypass the framework. The entire platform runs through the framework. It's like trying to bypass our own nervous system. I sipped my tea, watching their desperation unfold in real time. They were discovering what I'd known for 3 years. The framework wasn't just part of the system. It was the system. Monday morning brought fresh hell. The launch event was scheduled for Thursday at 2 p.m., with investors flying in from both coasts. The demo environments were failing randomly. Not crashing, that would have been fixable. Just pausing, like someone hitting a cosmic pause button for exactly 94 seconds before resuming. Graham called an emergency all-hands at 10 a.m., even from outside the company. I could feel his rage through the leaked messages innovation team members were posting to private Discord servers. Find her, he'd apparently screamed. Get Lena back here, whatever it takes. David called me at noon. His voice was different now, no longer dismissive, almost pleading. Lena, we need you to come in, just for a consultation. I was terminated. Remember overhead eliminated? That was a miscommunication. Graham wants to discuss a consulting arrangement. Through HarrowCore LLC. A pause. What? My consulting company, the one that owns the framework license. Longer pause. What do you mean? Owns? David, did you ever read the licensing agreement from 3 years ago? Lena, this is serious. The entire Novaverse launch is at risk. I know. The silence stretched so long I thought he'd hung up. Finally, what do you want? Nothing. I don't work there anymore. Remember, I'm sure the innovation team can handle it. They're very talented. Tuesday was beautiful. Austin's weather perfect. Cloudless sky. Temperature in the low 70s. I spent the morning at a coffee shop downtown. Laptop open to my HarrowCore admin panel. The framework was functioning perfectly for me. Every diagnostic showed green. Every health check passed. The system was purring like a well-maintained engine. For Orion, it was dying by degrees. Not dramatically, not obviously, just a slow withdrawal of cooperation. Authentication tokens expiring milliseconds too soon. Database connections pooling incorrectly. Cache invalidation running in reverse order. Each issue individually fixable, but together. Together they were organizational cancer. Camille called me personally on Wednesday morning. I'd never spoken to her directly before I'd been too far beneath her notice. "Ms. Harrow?" she began, her voice honey over steel. "I understand there's been a misunderstanding about your separation from Orion." "No misunderstanding. I was terminated as overhead." "Graham may have been hasty. We'd like to rectify that." "How thoughtful." "The Novaverse launch is important to us. To me, personally." "I'm aware. $77 million worth of importance." Her tone sharpened. "What do you want?" "Money, equity, your job back." "Mrs. Ellis, I don't want anything. I was very clear that the framework required a proper handoff. Your husband chose to ignore that requirement. The consequences were documented in the licensing agreement." "You're sabotaging us." "I'm doing nothing. Literally nothing. That's the point." "We'll sue you into oblivion." For what? Enforcing a legal contract your company signed." She hung up. Wednesday night, 12 hours before the launch, Graham sent an email to the entire company. Someone forwarded it to me within minutes. Subject line, "All hands critical mission." "Team, tomorrow defines our future. The challenges we're facing are opportunities to prove our innovation capabilities. The old dependencies that constrained us are breaking down. And that's exactly what we wanted. Move fast, break things, build tomorrow." Beautiful corporate poetry, completely useless against a framework that had decided to stop listening. I went to bed early, setting my alarm for 1:30 p.m. Thursday. I wanted to be awake for the show. Thursday morning arrived with the kind of crystalline clarity that makes disasters more memorable. I woke at 6 a.m., made coffee, and opened my laptop to watch Orion DataWorks frantically prepare for the most important presentation in company history. The framework had entered what I called selective compliance mode. At midnight, it wasn't refusing to work that would have been too obvious, too actionable. Instead, it was selectively forgetting. API endpoints would work perfectly for 3 calls, then require re-authentication on the 4th. Database queries would cache incorrectly, serving data from 7 minutes ago instead of real time. The billing module would accept transactions, but hold them in a pending state for exactly 94 seconds before processing. 94 seconds, the same length as Clause 7b's subsection on remediation periods. My phone had been silent since Camille's call, but I could watch the chaos through system logs, every failed API call, every timeout, every desperate retry, all visible in my HarrowCore admin panel. The innovation team was throwing everything at the wall, patches, workarounds, even attempting to fork the entire framework. But you can't fork something when you don't own the original repository. At noon, I dressed carefully, not for an office I'd never returned to, but for myself. Professional blazer, the good watch, even the earrings I'd received for my 5-year anniversary. If you're going to watch an empire burn, you should dress for the occasion. The investor call was scheduled for 2 p.m., but I knew they'd do a final system check at 1:30. I positioned myself at a wine bar across from Orion's headquarters, laptop open, HarrowCore admin panel live on my screen. The countdown timer I'd embedded in the framework showed 30 minutes until full activation of Clause 7b. At exactly 1:30 p., the framework made its first announcement. Not to me, I already knew what was happening, but to every user logged into the Orion system. A small notification appeared, System Ownership Verification in Progress. My phone exploded. 17 missed calls in 3 minutes, text messages from numbers I didn't recognize, even a desperate email from Graham himself. Subject line, "Urgent, please respond, we'll discuss anything." I turned my phone face down and ordered a glass of Pinot Noir. At 1:45, the framework's second notification, license holder verification pending, HarrowCore LLC administrative rights activating. Through the wine bar's window, I could see people running between buildings at Orion's campus. Someone, probably Brandon, was on the roof, checking satellite dishes as if the problem was with connectivity. It wasn't. The connection was perfect. The framework was simply changing owners, exactly as documented in Clause 7b. Subsection 3. Upon triggering of reversion conditions, the system shall provide appropriate notification to all users of the ownership transition. At 1:55, 5 minutes before the investor call, the framework delivered its masterstroke. Every screen in Orion DataWorks displayed the same message. Orchestration Framework, 3.7 license status, reverting. Previous license holder, Orion DataWorks. Current license holder, HarrowCore, LLC Administrator Lena Harrow. Time to complete transfer, 00:04:47. I sipped my wine and pulled up the investor call on my tablet. They'd made it public, maximum transparency, maximum confidence. Camille was at the podium, Graham beside her, both maintaining rictus smiles as someone whispered urgently in Graham's ear. "Ladies and gentlemen," Camille began, her voice steady despite what must have been internal screaming. "Welcome to the future of enterprise data management. Today, we launch Novaverse, a $77 million revolution in..." Every screen behind her went dark. Then, slowly, they flickered back to life with a new message. Novaverse platform status. Pending administrator approval. Please contact HarrowCore LLC. Authorization required from Lena Harrow Framework. License expired. New licensing terms pending negotiation. The investor call erupted, not with questions, but with the specific silence that precedes massive financial hemorrhaging. I could see Graham lunging for a laptop, typing frantically. Camille maintained her smile, but her hands were shaking as she gripped the podium. "We're experiencing a minor technical delay," she announced. "Our team is..." The screens changed again. Countdown to complete system lock, T000248. Someone in the investor call asked, "Is your system being ransomed?" "No," Camille said quickly. "This is an internal..." "Then why does it say administrator approval required from someone named Lena Harrow?" Graham grabbed the microphone. "Technical glitch. We're resolving it. By negotiating new licensing terms during your launch." The countdown continued. 15. I finished my wine and closed my laptop. There was nothing more to see. The framework would lock at exactly 2 p.m., freezing every transaction, every API call, every piece of data in perfect suspension. Not destroyed, not stolen, just paused, waiting for administrator approval that would never come without proper negotiation with HarrowCore LLC. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Name your price. Anything, please." I didn't respond. There was no price for 7 years of being called overhead. No dollar amount for being laughed at, dismissed, erased. But there was something poetic about $77 million in investor funds frozen at the moment of triumph. All because they'd forgotten to read the fine print. All because they'd forgotten that the gravedigger always keeps the keys to the cemetery. The boardroom at Orion DataWorks had been transformed into a war room through the live stream that someone forgot to cut. I watched the complete dissolution of corporate composure. The investor call was supposed to end at 2:30 p.m., but at 2 p.m. exactly, when the framework executed its final lock, everything changed. The main presentation screen, the one showing Camille's revolutionary Novaverse dashboard, froze mid-transition, not crashed frozen, like someone had pressed pause on reality itself. The loading bar stopped at exactly 94%. The real-time transaction counter stuck at 3,847,293.91 times. Every metric, every graph, every beautiful visualization Camille had spent months perfecting became a monument to absolute stillness. "What's happening?" An investor's voice crackled through the stream. Is this the demonstration? Graham lunged for the keyboard, typing commands that did nothing. The innovation team surrounded him, their fingers flying across laptops, tablets, phones, any device that might restore their control. But you can't unlock a door when someone else owns the building. The secondary screens around the boardroom began displaying new messages, one by one, like dominoes falling in slow motion. Orchestration state locked. License holder HarrowCore LLC. Administrator Lena Harrow. Status awaiting terms negotiation. Then, the countdown timer appeared, T00248, to complete data freeze. Someone explained this immediately. The lead investor from Sequoia didn't sound interested in innovation anymore. Camille maintained her position at the podium, her $77 million smile cracking at the edges. We're experiencing a temporary— This isn't temporary, another investor interrupted. Your system is displaying someone else's name as administrator during your launch while asking for license negotiation. T00215. Brandon from IT was practically crying as he typed. It's not responding to any overrides. Root access is rejected. Even the backup systems are locked. Force restart the servers, Graham shouted. We can't. The framework won't release the processes. T00147. David finally spoke, his voice barely audible through the chaos. We terminated her without a handoff agreement. The framework license reverts to her company if that happens. It's in the contract. The room went silent except for the investor call's open channel broadcasting their catastrophe to the world. You knew this. Graham's face had turned an alarming shade of purple. I thought it was just boilerplate. Standard contractor language. T00115. A new message appeared on every screen. Would you like to begin license negotiation with HarrowCore LLC YSN? Graham hammered Y on every keyboard within reach. Nothing happened. Why isn't it working? Camille's voice had lost all its coached resonance. Tyler, the one who'd called me the COBOL Queen, spoke from his laptop. The request has to come from an authorized representative. According to the system, that's no one currently at Orion. T0045. The investors were fleeing the call. I could see the participant count dropping 47, 32, 18, 12. Hundreds of millions in funding evaporating with each disconnection. Get her on the phone, Graham screamed. Now. We've tried, Rebecca from HR stammered. She's not answering. T0020. The framework began its final countdown in massive red numbers across every screen. Even the lobby displays, the break room monitors, the security desk panels all showing the same merciless countdown. 10, 9, 8. Camille grabbed Graham's arm. Do something. 7, 6, 5. Please, Graham whispered to the screen, to the universe, to anyone listening. Please. 4, 3, 2, 1. Every screen in Orion DataWorks went black. Then, slowly, a single message appeared in clean white text. System successfully transferred to HarrowCore LLC. All operations suspended pending license agreement. Data integrity 100% preserved. Estimated downtime indefinite. For licensing inquiries, contact Administrator Lena Harrow. Thank you for using HarrowCore Framework 3.7. The investor call ended with someone saying, I want our legal team on this immediately. Through the forgotten live stream, I watched Graham sink into a chair, his white sneakers stark against the dark carpet. Camille stood frozen at the podium, her revolution suspended in digital amber. The innovation team had stopped typing, their screens reflecting the same message, their disruption thoroughly disrupted. Stock price alerts started flooding my phone. Orion DataWorks, 31%, 44%, 58%, and falling. I closed the live stream and ordered another glass of wine. The bar was playing jazz, something smooth and timeless. The bartender asked if I was celebrating something. A transition, I told him. New job. New ownership structure. He smiled and poured generously. At 4 p.m. exactly. My phone rang. Unknown number. But I recognized the area code Orion's legal department. I let it go to voicemail. The message was brief. Ms. Harrow, this is General Counsel for Orion DataWorks. We need to discuss immediate restoration of services. Please call back immediately. This is urgent. Urgent. Everything was urgent when it was their emergency. I left the wine bar and walked along Lady Bird Lake, watching the sun paint the water gold. Somewhere behind me, a $77 million launch had become a $77 million hostage situation. And the beautiful irony, every second they waited, every moment they delayed, their investors grew more nervous, their stock price fell further, and their innovation became more obsolete. They'd eliminated their overhead. Now they were learning what overhead had actually been holding up. The call started at 4:03 p.m. and didn't stop. Graham, Camille, David, legal, the board of directors, even the mayor's office, concerned about Austin's reputation as a tech hub. I watched my phone light up from my apartment, each call a small admission of defeat. By 6 p.m., the financial news had picked up the story. Orion DataWorks trading halted after technical meltdown. Novaverse launch suspended indefinitely. 77.7 NAS. Investment in jeopardy as company loses system control. They still didn't understand. They kept calling it a hack, a ransomware attack, a cyber incident. Nobody wanted to admit the truth they'd been beaten by a contract they'd signed themselves. At 8:47 p.m., Graham Ellis stood outside my apartment building. I watched him from my window, no more white sneakers, no more Silicon Valley swagger, just a broken man in a wrinkled suit, holding his phone like a lifeline. The doorbell rang. I let it ring. He called from the street. This time, I answered. Lena, his voice was hollow. Please. Graham? The company is dying. Every minute the system is down costs us hundreds of thousands. Our investors are pulling out. The board is calling for my resignation. That sounds like a you problem. What do you want? Name it. Money, equity. My job. You can have it all. I don't want your job. Graham, I had a job. You eliminated it. I was wrong. I'm sorry. Is that what you want to hear? What I want, I said slowly, is for you to understand that infrastructure isn't overhead. People aren't legacy systems. And maybe, just maybe, you should read contracts before you sign them. The framework we need it back online. The entire company depends on it. I know. I built it that way. Silence. Then what are your terms? HarrowCore LLC is willing to license the framework to Orion DataWorks. The rate is 10% of all Novaverse revenue for the next 5 years. TARS. 10%. That's $7.7 million. Actually, with your projected growth, it's closer to $12 million. But who's counting? That's extortion. That's business. Innovation has a price. You taught me that. By midnight, the contracts were drawn up. Orion's legal team worked faster than I'd ever seen them move. 10% of Novaverse revenue, full recognition of HarrowCore LLC's ownership, irrevocable administrator rights, and a clause I insisted on personally. The contributions of system architects shall be recognized as essential to company operations, never to be classified as overhead. Graham signed at 12:43 a.m. His signature was shaky, defeated. I restored the system at exactly 1 a.m. Watching the framework come back to life was like watching a city wake up, lights flickering on, data flowing, transactions processing. Novaverse resumed mid-breath, that loading bar finally completing its journey to 100%. The relief in Graham's face was almost painful to witness. Thank you, he whispered. Don't thank me. Just remember I didn't do this to save your company. I did it to prove a point. What point? That every empire is only as strong as the foundation it's built on, and you just spent 2 weeks learning who really owns yours. I closed the door on him and returned to my laptop. The HarrowCore admin panel showed all green lights. 8 million transactions had been queued during the downtime, all processing now, all routing through my framework, all generating revenue that would flow, in part, to me. 3 days later, Orion announced Graham's resignation. Pursuing other opportunities, the press release said, Camille's Novaverse still launched, 3 weeks late and 40 million under projections. The innovation team was quietly dissolved. Most of them left for other startups, other disruptions, probably never understanding what had really happened. David called me once, weeks later. They're hiring a new head of infrastructure, he said. The position comes with a board seat, full recognition. They specifically requested someone who understands legacy systems. Not interested, I told him. The salary is... I said not interested. I have my own company to run now. HarrowCore LLC had started taking other clients, companies that had heard about the Orion incident, CTOs who suddenly wanted to review their licensing agreements, startups that realized infrastructure wasn't something you could just innovate away. I never went back to the Orion building, never attended another all-hands meeting, never had to hear another executive call my work overhead. From my apartment office in Santa Barbara, overlooking the ocean, I sometimes check the framework's status, still processing millions of transactions daily, still generating revenue, still absolutely under my control. They'd fired me as overhead. But overhead, it turns out, was the only thing keeping their sky from falling. The framework still runs, Orion still pays, and somewhere in Austin, there's a boardroom where executives now read every contract, every clause, every single word before they sign. Because they learned the hard way the person you dismiss as legacy might just be the one holding your future in escrow. And sometimes, the best revenge isn't destroying what they built. It's letting them keep it at exactly the price they never wanted to pay. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where in the world you're listening from. Drop a comment below, and let's connect. If you enjoyed this tale of corporate karma and sweet revenge, please subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts. Have you ever witnessed or experienced a similar situation where someone undervalued turned the tables? Let me know in the comments. Your stories and perspectives make this community amazing.